Well, welcome everyone to Heart and Soul, part 2 of a four-part series. Today, we're going to be looking at soul fragments and learn about the different kinds of soul fragments that someone can have within them, especially after experiencing a violation to their very soul. Some of these violations that our soul has suffered, we've never given those parts of us a time to ventilate the hurt, and no time for that part to be validated in those emotions it felt at whatever age, because parts of our soul can be broken at various age groups, and we're going to find that out today. So welcome. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 14 through 18, we read, "For the entire Torah is completed in one word, in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And if you bite and devour one another, beware, lest you be consumed by one another. And I say," and of course this is Paul speaking to the Galatians, "and I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are opposed to each other, so that you do not do what you desire to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law." So, as mentioned in Galatians, we do not desire to bite and devour one another, nor do we want to bite and devour our fragmented parts. And I was thinking about this, because I used to oversimplify these verses about, if you walk in the Spirit, you will not accomplish the lust of the flesh. Okay, so I always kind of simplified it to things that I would do, even though I wouldn't understand why I did some of them. I was just like, well, that's not of Yah, but I never correlated it to possibly being due to the fleshly segments and soul fragments that may be within me that were not healed, because I'd want not to do that, and then I'd end up doing it again. But if our soul fragments, which I consider our flesh, if our soul fragments are wounded, and if they've never been healed, we're just going to repeat that. We're going to repeat that cycle. So by taking the fragmentation of the soul course, it made me understand my own soul more deeply, and I hope it does yours as well. As I said before we began, the 5 V's that we studied last week are very valuable in understanding how to commune on your bed with your soul, because Yah will bring up those violations that happened to you over the years, whether in elementary school, whether in church, whether in a broken relationship, whether at work. He's going to bring up those violations that we've never gone back in and communed with our soul to discuss before Yahuah. And we've never given that part of our soul a chance to ventilate how they felt at whatever age. And we've never communed with them at that particular age for healing. And we haven't walked them through the process of how to forgive, or how to get over that particular relationship if they are still tormented by that person, place, or thing. So there's a lot of things going on in our soul that rises up through our flesh if it's not addressed. So for me, Galatians chapter 5, 14 through 18 has much greater meaning And I don't know if I communicated that well for you or not, but that's what I'm seeing, because I oversimplified, walking in the Spirit, and you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh. See, the more we heal our soul and our soul fragments, because we're going to learn our soul fragments have their own mind, will, and emotions. Now, that's not saying they have their own brain. No, we have one physical brain, but they have their own mind that may have been broken at one time. Their broken mind, broken will, broken emotions, and so they need to be communed with. They need to be told that we have the core self of ourselves has received Jesus from Nazareth, or has received Yahuah HaMashiach. But if they're a little part, call him Jesus from Nazareth. And how Jesus came to heal us, and he wants to integrate us. He wants us to commune with one another, because we need all of our parts, and to let each broken part within us know how important it is to us. We don't want to cast out our parts. We want our original parts. Now, we will later learn that a fragmented soul is more prone to demonic influences. And we'll look at that, because sometimes a person needs just healing. Sometimes a person needs deliverance after testing the Spirit. And sometimes we need both healing and deliverance. So we need to start getting used to adding the word healing along with the word deliverance. And we need to be able to discern what is needed at any particular time. So the goal is to strengthen believers and to strengthen our soul fragments to walk in the Spirit and let the brokenness in us heal. The way to do this is to synchronize our soul, and our soul equals our mind, will, and emotions to his Spirit within us. Because remember from last week, it is our spirit that is born anew, right? Our soul goes into the sanctification process, does it not? The sanctification process of becoming synchronized with his Spirit within us. Having the mind of Yahushua, doing the will of the Father, and having our emotions correlate and bearing the fruit of the Spirit. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And that's what we're going to look at today. So the heart and soul. And like last week, we looked at how in Isaiah 61, and we're going to look at it further in Luke chapter 4, how he first and foremost came to bring the good news. This is true. And second on his list was to mend the brokenhearted, to set the captives free, because we can be held captive in our very soul. It can be full of unforgiveness. It can have developed bitterness, envy, strife, anger. It can have all of these things, but Yah wants us to bear his fruit of the Spirit. And so we will see in Luke chapter 4, we see Yahushua's prophetic purpose with his first coming recorded here. And he was quoting from the verse we read last week from Isaiah 61. Luke 4 verse 1, it says, and Yahushua being filled, he was filled with the set apart Spirit, returned from the Jordan, and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, being tried for 40 days by the devil. And in those days he did not eat at all, and afterward, when they had ended, he was hungry. See, The prince of the power of the air is always going to attack us when we are at our weakest. But we must remember, when we are at our weakest, he is strongest in our lives, is he not? So he was going to attack Yahushua when he was hungry. He was really hungry. After 40 days, are you kidding me? You're hungry. So we are reminded of the acronym HALT. HALT whenever you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And it's easier said than done. But remember, HALT. And it goes on to say in verse 16, and he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And according to his practice, he went into the congregation on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. And having unrolled the scroll, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of Yahuah is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring the good news to the poor, first and foremost. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to send away crushed ones with a release." Crushed ones, severely fragmented souls, crushed ones with a release. Do you know the load lifted off someone's shoulders to know that? Do we see how much he loves us and how much he cares for the brokenness we suffer in this world? We are the apple of his eye. He loves you. He loves me. And he has a purpose for each one of our lives. And the more we can be healed, the more of his power, his resurrected power, can work in us and through us. And lastly, in verse 19, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahuah, which is just around the corner. Now, keep in mind, we just read from Luke chapter 4, but what just took place in Luke chapter 3? I mean, we just read he had come from the Jordan. So at this point, Yahushua had already been baptized by the true high priest, John the Immerser, and filled with the set-apart spirit. We just read about that. Now, what I'm about to say may be new understanding for some of you, but John the Baptist was the true high priest that was functioning in the wilderness. Why? Because of the corruption in the temple. I think we have a very similar scenario today with the corruption in the pulpits and in temples and so forth and so on. John the Baptist, he was the best qualified, and he was chosen for his role from the womb, from when Elizabeth, his mother, carried him. Yahushua came to John to be mikvah. He came to John to be baptized, to fulfill all righteousness of priestly transferences according to the book of the law. You see, the book of the law was still in place at that time, and most people that call themselves Christians totally missed this whole thing. I know I did at one point, because I could never understand why John the Baptist was baptizing Yahushua. You know, I was puzzled like John the Baptist was. You know, he was feeling unworthy to touch his sandal straps. And remember, Yahushua said, "This must be done to complete all righteousness." Now that we've delved deeper into his word, we get it. It was in regards to the priestly transference that was taking place between John the Immerser and Yahushua. So the book of the law, which is not the same as the book of the covenant, and I have a priestly series you can go back and look at if you don't know the difference between the book of the covenant and the book of the law. So the book of the law was still in place at that time. And what most believers in Jesus miss is the magnitude of events that transpired with the baptism of Yahushua, or the mikvah of Yahushua, just another word for baptism. Yahushua, what was he doing? What was he doing? Yahushua was ushering in the change in priesthood, the shift. He was ushering in the shift, the same shift that took place between Moses and Aaron after the sin of the golden calf. And we'll get to that. But Yahushua was once again ushering in the change of priesthood back to the Melchizedek from the Aaronic Levitical priesthood, because the Melchizedek priesthood existed before the Aaronic Levitical priesthood. That's a news flash for many people that needs to be grasped. With this change in priesthood would come the change in law to be administered from the book of the law back to the book of the covenant. We read about that in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11 through 12. Truly then, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people were given the book of the law, why was there still need for another priest to arise according to the order of what? Melchizedek, and not be called according to the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, of necessity, there takes place a change of law also. And this is from the Scriptures 2009 version, and it is footnoted even from Melchizedek to Aaronic. And then when Yahushua came, the shift was shifting back from Aaronic back to the Melchizedek. It's very clear. And with a change in priesthood would come a change in law. Now, keep in mind, none of his word is done away with. Now, people will be accuse you of saying that, but I'm not saying that. All his word is profitable. However, the right division of laws to be administered is determined by the reigning priesthood. Just look at the leader in your country, or the president of the United States. When there's a change in presidencies, does the next president follow everything that the previous president, or are there made amendments and modifications? It changes based on who is in that position, much like is demonstrated in his word. So the book of the covenant is now what we are under, because Yahushua ushered in the new covenant. It is also sometimes referred to as royal Torah. James in chapter 2, verse 8, we read, if you really fulfill the royal law, that's the Melchizedek righteous law, according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. So Yahushua updated Yah's covenant commands while sharing the good news of the covenant confirming gospel message. For instance, if you look at someone with lust in your eyes, he tells the people in Matthew chapter 5, you have committed adultery. So see, he kind of updated some of the covenant commands. Again, he said, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment, and so forth. So there's many things that got updated, if you will, in the New Testament, in the gospel messages, because we know Yahushua gave his life and shed his blood once and for all. So under the continuous sacrifices under the book of the law, that changed because Yahushua gave his blood once and for all. there's no need to go back to animal sacrifices and trample on his blood. This begins Yahushua's ministry as the Spirit descended upon him. And when John announced, you remember this? Behold, the Lamb of Elohim. So from that point, when John the Immerser identifies Yahushua as behold, the Lamb of Elohim, that began his ministry. You see, his ministry as the Lamb had to be longer than a year, yet shorter than 2 years, to be qualified to be the spotless sacrificial lamb that would take away the sins of the world for those that would enter in through himself, the door, the good shepherd. So some people say his ministry was 3.5 years. I say no. It was from the time that he was identified as behold, the Lamb of Elohim, unto the day of Pentecost. We read about the qualifications for the spotless lamb in Exodus chapter 12, verse 5 through 7. Your lamb shall be without blemish. And he was without blemish. A male, a year old, had to be at least a year old, but couldn't be greater than 2 years of age. It goes on to say, you may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. And we have been washed by the blood of the Lamb. His blood is over our house, our temple, our body. So those that can enter the tent of meeting can enter into the door of the tent of meeting are those that have been washed by the blood of the Lamb and have entered into the new blood-ratified marriage covenant that he ushered in. His ministry on earth began the regathering of the scattered and fragmented parts of corporate Israel and individual souls, both externally and internally. We recall Israel physically came out of Egyptian bondage, but their hearts, their souls did not. Because of that, they make many mistakes that would require correction and healing, just like ourselves. Their first camp would be Sukkot. This would be their place of transition. And it is also our place of transition as we tabernacle with Yahuah. This is where we choose to tabernacle with him and come out of her, my people, lest we share in her sins and her plagues. It would not be long that their souls would get them in deeper trouble. Do not our souls, our fragmented souls, get us in deeper trouble? Yes. Their hearts, their very souls would choose to worship an Egyptian god, a golden calf. And within 40 days after saying yes to his proposal, the marriage covenant at Mount Sinai, they broke it. They broke it. Now, a systematic approach would be required to deal with this extreme case of fragmentation and DID, dissociative identity disorder. I mean, that is happening at this very moment in the traditional Christian churches. They are still worshiping golden calves. I mean, I know we appreciate our humble beginnings, and most of us came out of that scenario, but they're still participating in heathen holidays. Christmas is the birth of Tammuz. Ishtar Easter is the worship of the fertility goddess. Yahuah has his feast days. We have been functioning, most of us have been functioning under lie-based beliefs. Yahuah understands this. But once we know the truth, we are responsible for that truth, and we are to study it out and commune with him with our souls, ask for forgiveness, ask for him to show us how to celebrate his feasts, because they are his feast for us, all of us that have entered in through the door of Yahushua HaMashiach. And when we do that, then we realize we no longer have dissociative identity disorder. No, we know who we are. We are Israel. We weren't told we were Israel. No, we were told that Israel was someplace over there in the Middle East that was just reestablished in 1948. And we believed it. All the while, we didn't even know that we are Israel born from above. Hello. When we realize that, we know who we are. We have our identity back. That's huge. You shouldn't just gloss over that. That's huge, because this world is programming and mind controlling people to this very day from the pulpits. Oh boy, they're sly. Oh. You have to have a discerning spirit to see through it. And once you see through it, it is sickening. It is sickening. And they're very articulate. Oh, yes, they're very captivating. They are masters of public speaking. They are wonderful at public speaking. But they have a forked tongue. And they're serving another Jesus. And it's not Jesus of Nazareth. I pray they do this unknowingly. But some do it knowingly. And that's between them and Yahuah. And we are to keep in prayer that the veil is lifted and that all come to see the truth. The Israelites worship the golden calf. And like I said, this is still taking place today. And because of them breaking their marriage covenant, a new system would need to be in place. We are going to learn as we go through this fragmented soul introductory 4-part series that some parts of our soul can be grouped together. You might want to group all the hurts that came from school together, or you may want to group all the hurts that came from church together, or the family, or whatever, because they all experience similar things. And so we're going to learn that a fragmented soul can be grouped off, and an organized system can be in place to deal with these groups. And much like what happened to Israel after the sin of the golden calf, there needed to be a new system. This system would be the initiation and transfer to the harsh schoolmaster, the book of the law, that would be administered by Aaron, the very one that molded the calf. We see this system will stay in place until Yahushua, our high priest, after the order of Melchizedek, can usher in the new covenant by his own blood once and for all. By doing so, we now possess the healing balm of Gilead to heal our hearts and souls individually and corporately. So if you can understand what happened to the Israelites out of Egypt, if you can understand the 42 campsites and all the transitions they went through, you can similarly understand and grasp what we need to do and how we need to heal our own fragmented soul internally, as demonstrated by the Israelites externally. Yah gave us this beautiful 3-dimensional picture of how to heal our fragmented soul. With Yahushua, our resurrected Savior, he has restored the Melchizedek priesthood back to its reigning position. And because he did so, he brought us the good news and the fact that he came to heal us, to set us free, to open the prison doors, just like he did for the Israelites. So in the process of healing fragmented parts, at times there is a need to group parts and place them in a system for an organized approach. That's what I alluded to earlier. Like I said, you could have school traumatic events, you might have church traumas, you may have family stress, you may have family abuse, you may have satanic ritual abuse. You know, the abuse has different levels. You see, there may have been several similar occurrences that several parts of your fragmented soul experienced. Therefore, if the parts are willing to be grouped together, the process is less arduous and the healing comes faster because you're not addressing each part in one group. If they agree to be grouped, you can commune with them as a group and the healing comes faster. And so that's what Pastor Bob gives us in great detail in the Fragmented Soul series. We see the same occurred for the Israelites out of Egypt. And this is what I was telling everyone before we began our session, that this is what I gleaned out from going through the Fragmented Soul series. I had a very strong connection to the Israelites out of Egypt. That's how I could visualize what Pastor Bob was telling us about our fragmented soul. So we see the same occur with Israelites out of Egypt because their first campsite was at Sukkot. It was named Sukkot. That was their first campsite out of 42 campsites. And there, right when they left Egypt, at that point at Sukkot, they were organized in a military formation and organized by clan and led by his spirit, the column of fire by night and the column of cloud by day. And does his spirit not lead us every day? And at every moment of the night when we awaken, he's still there with us. He's still leading us. The Israelites were being transitioned from a fragmented slave mentality to a grouping and birthing of Israel, Yahuah's firstborn, who would receive Yah's spiritual blessing, but would also receive his birthright blessing. Let us not forget, however, that the seed and promise given to Abraham began with Israel observing Passover under the protection of the blood of the Lamb. At this first campsite, Sukkot, we see the grouping of fragmented Israel and that the bones of Joseph were retrieved at Shechem, the very place Abraham received the promise given in Genesis 12, verse 6 and 7. To your seed I give this land. I ran across a website that went over 8 myths about soul fragments. I found it helpful, and I'm not trying to stray away from our focus on Pastor Bob Strahan's Fragmented Soul series, but I had some misconceptions about soul fragments, so I thought this may be good to insert here. One myth was you have to be really messed up to have them. Wrong. Everybody has fragments because everybody has gone through some type of violation. The violation might be bigger. My violation may be bigger than yours, and so forth and so on, but violations still hurt. Fragmentation exists on a spectrum. So far, this blogger named Seneca Sherban correlates to what Pastor Bob has been sharing with us. It's a continuum. You can have little pieces of your soul that splinter off and carry an emotion or memory that you didn't know how to cope with at the age you were. And at the other end of the spectrum, you can split and have multiple alters that are well-developed parts with their own personalities, like in dissociative identity disorder, as well as everything in between. Having fragments doesn't mean that you will ever dissociate, although it usually means you'll overreact in certain circumstances. And that's what I'm talking about. You know, that's what I would see. Our flesh, our probably the brokenness in our soul is our flesh rising up because it hasn't been healed, but we didn't know how to heal it. So 2, you need to be able to classify it as either a fragment or an alter. She says that's a myth. As mentioned, emotional trauma is on a spectrum. Sometimes it's an obvious alter, has a well-developed personality, and sometimes it's not easy to know. For the tools in their book, you don't need to differentiate. A third myth, they're demons. Well, like I said, Pastor Bob did share that with someone with a badly fragmented soul or more prone to be influenced by demons, but most of our fragmented parts are our original parts, and we don't want to cast them out. They just need healing. So she wrote, brace yourself. Just because you are hearing a negative voice or having a bad feeling does not automatically mean it's a demon. And it doesn't, because his word biblically says to test the spirits to see. So if there's a wound in your past, it could very well be a fragment that's crying out, overreacting, or angry. If your deliverance isn't taking, it's probably because you can't cast out a part of yourself. It needs healing. And we definitely don't want to try to torment someone more by trying to cast out an original part. That would not promote the healing process at all. The 4th myth is they are spooky, they're scary. No, they're more like abused and hurting inner children. Go get them, love them back to wholeness. They've been carrying all the pain, and now that you are stronger, you can help, because that's kind of why they got broken in the first place, because your core self wasn't that strong to handle it at the time. 5, the 5th myth. You can just pray a little blanket prayer, have faith, and it's all good. Boy, man, we functioned under that one for a while, huh? And we weren't any better. And we got more frustrated. I don't know, maybe I'm just preaching to myself. But she goes, you probably will be able to get some of the fragments that were ready to integrate. You know, they weren't that bad off anyway by doing someone's prayer template. But the downside is that you're minimizing the other part's pain, marginalizing their voices, and not actually addressing the wounds. I think that was well said. The 6th myth, you need a psychotherapist, a shaman, or a minister. We have to remember, all of you that have joined this Shabbat group, we understand that he ushered in the new covenant. We've partaken in that covenant, and we have become his kingdom of priests after every tongue, tribe, people, and nation. And that's repeated throughout Scripture, especially in Revelation chapter 5. So this is the 6th myth. You don't need a psychotherapist, shaman, or minister. If you can get professional help, do it, she said. However, there's quite a bit you can do on your own. And I believe that's what Pastor Bob is showing us by using the 5 V's and communing with our souls. Now, he understands how to help someone through the process of healing their soul. And he also and his wife know how to do proper deliverance. So at times there is a need to find the right ministry, the right individual a trustworthy one, preferably Bible-based, because if you don't have a strong foundation in his word, you can be led astray at that time because of your fragmented soul already. So you have to be careful. So there's quite a bit you can do on your own, which will save appointment time and money. You're not going to be able to take it all on by yourself. We all have our blind spots, but start the process anyway. Learn all you can and be patient with yourself. Excuse me. The seventh myth: fragments aren't biblical. And that is obviously a myth. And we have already proven that was one of the main reasons Yahuah came. And this is my interpretation of this, because he came to mend the brokenhearted, set the captives free, and open the prison doors, both individually and corporately. And we have numerous examples of brokenness by the examples that King David left for us in Psalms. 8, you have to relive the pain in order to heal. No, you don't want to re-traumatize yourself, and you don't want to re-traumatize others. When you work with fragments, she said, in the spirit realm, like we demonstrate in their book, there is usually no reliving or remembering. However, my rule of thumb has been that if a memory surfaces, it's because it needed to be consciously addressed. So I just found those helpful, and I just wanted to include them, not to change our focus away from the Fragmented Soul series by Pastor Bob Strahan, but there are a lot of myths out there, and I thought that was a short way to address several of them. So, types of parts. Now let's look at the types of parts that God, Yahuah, provides as a protective mechanism or a temporary prosthesis or crutch to help us. So we have to remember our soul fragments as a temporary protective mechanism. Just like when Israel sinned with the golden calf, Yahuah gave them the book of the law as a temporary prosthesis to help them get along in life, to help them learn the ABCs of who he was, until he could come and usher the Melchizedek priesthood back to its reigning position. So sometimes the parts can have their own identity. They can have their own names. They can have their own memories. They can have their own mind, will, and emotions. That really was kind of mind-blowing to me. They have different abilities. They can even have their own accents and languages. Say what? Bob Strahan said, and he shared the story, he recalled dealing with a woman who had been brought up in a Spanish-speaking place, and some of her parts were fragmented so early, those parts did not speak English. These parts had not learned English. They had stayed young and never learned English. In most cases, they are a version of us, but are fragmented due to the result of trauma. Richard Schwartz, he has a book, No Bad Parts, and he puts those fragmented parts into 3 categories: exiles, firefighters, and protectors. So for him, that's how he found it very useful to group them in that way and put them in such a system as exiles, firefighters, and protector parts. He places them in a system called the internal family system, because he would go in and do family counseling, and he approached it from an external only way. But he later realized that the external picture, though broken, was just a mirror of the internal souls of the people in that family being broken. So he shares that in his many years as a counselor, he realized that it was not only the external family that needed to be addressed, but the individual internal family system that needed healing, which in turn affected their external family, their external environment. And the same for us. If we don't address our internal fragmented souls, we affect our external environment around us. So we are Israel born from above, and we must address our internal fragmented souls, get our house in order so that we do not adversely affect our immediate external environments. Nor do we want to adversely affect the coming together of the one new man, Israel, Yahuah's firstborn. Because if we really focus on healing, then we will see more unity within ourselves and externally around ourselves. They say people that are aware of their fragmented parts sometimes create inner worlds. This may be a cruise ship or a classroom setting. As true believers, our internal world, as I mentioned before we got started, may be Bible land. It might be the Garden of Eden. It could be the tent of meeting and entering the holy place as his priest. Or you might envision what John the Revelator envisioned in Revelation 5. For me, I envision the tent of meeting with the menorah, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense before his presence. So you can develop inner worlds. Not everybody has inner worlds, but I do believe we as believers, and knowing that we are the kingdom of priests, we probably all have some type of inner world when we go in to commune with him, as we enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. So the types of parts, I have a little diagram in the lower left-hand corner. The first type of part is genuine parts, and most all of these that are pictured can be genuine parts, even though I have just one label down there for a genuine part. Most all of them are genuine parts, except for the clone parts, and possibly the oppressed parts may have some demonic influence, but most everything else that Pastor Bob broke down into possible parts, that doesn't mean you have all of these broken parts. This is just an example of some of the parts he has come across. So he says genuine parts, these are us. These are parts of us that have been fragmented, and they usually remain at the age when the trauma occurred. This is really important to remember when we are going through the healing process. Because of this, we should not talk to such parts as an adult to an adult, but should speak to them in a childlike fashion. We need to use terms and words that they will understand. We cannot speak to a 3-year-old as we would to an adult. You might say, well, how can that part be 3? Because it was fragmented. It was broken at age 3. And because it has never received healing, it hasn't been communed with, it hasn't been given the opportunity to ventilate the violation and to be validated. You see how the 5 V's integrate into this? There hasn't been a time for forgiveness. So mentally, the parts broken during childhood stayed at that age, whether it is 3, 6, or 9 years of age. Does it have the capacity to grow? Yes, it does. It is a genuine part of us, but it is still a broken, hurt child that needs healing, and it needs to be heard, and it needs to be loved. Have you ever heard of someone say, it's my inner child? Yes. Have you ever experienced that when you just feel a little childish, and immature? Sometimes, but not always, it's just us being funny. But sometimes on the negative side, when we have the emotions of a child, when something has upset us and we feel very childlike and we follow through and display childlike behavior, there is a very good chance that that broken part in us is still there. And it's 3, it might be 9, it might be 12. Therefore, the emotions remain at the age of being broken. So if we try to heal an inner child when we are 36 years of age, and let's say the part is 6 years of age, we must recognize there is a 30-year gap of maturity that needs to be bridged to reach that inner child. So genuine parts are us, but they have been broken and not healed yet. All these parts in the diagram can be genuine parts of us, except for the clone parts, as I mentioned, and possibly sometimes the oppressed parts can be under demonic influence. We want all of our genuine parts. We do not want to be binding and casting out our genuine parts when what they need is healing and not necessarily deliverance. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes there is a need for healing, sometimes there's a need for deliverance, and sometimes there's a need for both healing and deliverance. But in deliverance, you should test the spirits. Whatever condition their condition is in, whatever the age when brokenness occurred, we need to meet the fragmented part where they are. Let the Ruach HaKodesh lead and guide you, and allow Yahuah to heal and integrate that wounded fragment with the balm of Gilead. And if you get stumped on how to address something, just ask the Ruach to lead you to understand how to connect with that part. You know, because you're not, you know, it might be in the middle of the night. You just can't pick up the phone and call anybody, but the Ruach is always there with you. So when Yahuah brought the Israelites out of Egypt, their growth in knowing him had been stunted, their conscience seared, their emotions violated. They had been brutally traumatized and abused. Yahuah took that into consideration when Moses interceded for the Israelites to spare their very lives after the sin of the golden calf. They had behaved as a rebellious, partying, stubborn child. Therefore, he placed them in a remedial classroom. He had already grouped the Israelites and now would place them in a system. This remedial classroom would be under a strict schoolmaster, the book of the law. The intent of the book of the law would be to mature them and teach them the ABCs of who he was and who they were as his people. This healing and maturing would take a great deal of time for some. Likewise, our healing may also take a great deal of time based on the severity of the brokenness we've suffered. King David spoke to himself in the Psalms. So did Solomon and also Paul. Paul said in Ephesians 5:19 to speak to each other in psalms and songs of praise and spiritual songs, singing and striking the strings in your heart, the vibrational strings, the communication in your heart to the master. David said in Psalm 4:4, stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart, your own soul upon your bed and be still. Maybe it was a case of David giving himself the things that he needed to hear when he was young, but didn't get to hear. Oftentimes, this is what happens. It may involve lie-based beliefs and negative words spoken into our life that we must denounce and unlearn. And again, our genuine parts are a result of fragmentation caused by STAG, stress, trauma, abuse, generational sins. And many times, the lie-based beliefs, and from my perspective, they have to be addressed simultaneously, if not before. Words of death and not words of life many times have been spoken over us. I view lie-based beliefs as a major form of mind control, is it not? I do believe, because, you know, it's sad to see, but Yah is lifting the veil on these lie-based beliefs. And we came out of the traditional church functioning under mixed doctrine, a combination of his word in a combination of heathen practices. And that's not good. It's truth mixed with lies. Isn't that what the prince of the power of the air does all the time? To program and misdirect people? Yeah, it's not good. So I view lie-based beliefs as a major form of mind control. Lies come from Satan. Truth comes from Yahuah, his word. We will get into lie-based beliefs in more detail later. However, this is why it is so important to work through our beliefs and see if they coincide with his word of truth, because that's our first piece of armor. And that's a piece of armor we haven't really taken very good care of. When we were in the traditional church, we can point our finger at ourselves because we did not search the scriptures and see if these things be so. We just believed what came out of whoever was speaking at the time. So just by unlearning the lies, healing will exponentially flourish. In order to break through the myriad of lie-based beliefs encountered from various sources, I mean, we develop these from various influencers in our life. It could be through schools and pastors. It could be parents, cultures, could be through politics, music. It goes on and on. We must turn to Yahuah and his word to learn and do the Father's will. That was the example Yahuah gave us. He did nothing but what the Father wanted him to do. And Yahuah told us to have his mind. And he wanted us to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit through our emotions. His word and the Ruach HaKodesh will lead us to all truth. Everything else you receive from the outside needs to be found and validated in his word before you believe it. We have established that oftentimes fragmented parts correlate to a certain age. So when we end up having the emotions of a 3-year-old, it's not something people should respond to by saying, oh, just grow up. Well, that is what they want to do, Pastor Bob says, but they can't because they're not healed yet. So telling someone to grow up is not necessarily the thing to do. And I think we've all said that phrase, hey, just grow up. We must recognize that person in that moment might actually just be 3, 6, or 12. It's the body of a 40-year-old adult, but mentally they're 6 at that present time. Why? Because they're experiencing the trauma that they had when they were 6. All those emotions and feelings were that of a 6-year-old. And you can't cancel that at age 40. You must talk to them in a non-condescending manner, but in the language they would understand. Personally, I can tell you that this can be quite confusing to encounter. It may be an adult man coming to you several times with a minor split fingernail, or an adult child calling their mother saying, "Mommy, I cleaned up my room." It is easy to think of such encounters as insignificant, or you might just blow it off and say, whatever, you know. Why do we do that? Because our minds can only handle so many things in one day. Our minds tend to delete those things that we think are just insignificant. I've got enough on my plate, I just can't think about that. Just delete it or diffuse it. Oh, it's no big deal. Come on, let's go on. Or overgeneralize things like, you always, you know, most of the time, not. So that's what our minds tend to do, delete, diffuse, or overgeneralize things as a way to cope. Hebrews 5:9-14. And having been perfected, he became the causer of everlasting deliverance. He gives us everlasting deliverance to all those obeying him. Isn't that beautiful? You notice that causer is capitalized. And having been perfected, hallelujah, he, Yahuah, became the causer of everlasting deliverance to all those obeying him, having been designated by Elohim a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, concerning whom we have much to say, and it's hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing, because most people that call themselves Christians, they become dull of hearing. They only want to hear those things that tickle their ears. They only want to hear those things that fit into their lifestyle. For indeed, although by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first elements of the words of Elohim. And you have become such as need milk and not solid food. For everyone partaking of milk is inexperienced in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food is for the mature, whose senses have been trained by practice to discern both good and evil. And I believe that is what Yahuah is doing with all of us gathered today. All of us that have really delved into his word, have been hungry for truth, have searched to understand who we are, because he needs his kingdom of priests strengthened at this time, because his return is drawing nigh. And there's a lot of people that think they have it worked out correctly, but sadly, they're functioning under lie-based beliefs. They are our brothers and sisters, but they have weak souls that are functioning under lie-based beliefs. And many times they end up doing the work of the enemy. Presenter parts. Presenter parts are the parts that are in front. The phrase in front relates to the part doing the main speaking. Presenter parts are in the front for most of our daily lives. They are the parts that function in our daily lives. This is the part that is up front most of the time. Sometimes people refer to the presenter part as the original core, but Pastor Bob said that's not always the case. Another part at times may step up to the plate to present. You know, like a little part might just all of a sudden appear, you know, an adult with a split thumbnail or whatever, moping over that. Well, that's not the adult part. That's a little part stepping forward. So now they could be a part of the original core, but sometimes they are not. Bob Straken shared that he has known people that had a presenter part and it wasn't part of the core. It had been at one stage, but it had been fragmented. So in general, what is termed as the core is often the main personality, but this doesn't mean it's the original. That doesn't mean to say it's the original part that has grown up with us, right? He said the presenter parts are just the ones that help us function on a day-to-day basis. That would be our main personality, but he said this can change. This can really change through the years. It can also depend on healing, salvation, and different things like understanding doctrine. Things can change with that. So it's best not to label them specifically, but focus on the healing, focus on the wounds, and putting things back together with the help and integration by Yahuah. If presenter parts can change, that may explain why friendships may drastically change, or you may look at your spouse and ask, who am I married to? Why? Because most people do not understand what a fragmented soul is all about. When we do a jigsaw, we can say, okay, that's a side piece, that's an edge. Okay, there's a bit of sky, there's a bit of a car, there's a bit of smoke from the train, there's a tree, and so forth. So what we're doing then is grouping the parts of the jigsaw into specific things, and we build the tree, we build the car, we build the train, and then we've got it all together. So we have the frame established, and we can then start filling in the other bits. It is almost the same way when working on ourselves. Once healing is obtained, then we can really focus on who we really are. Imagine that. Once healing is obtained, then we can really focus on who we really are. Because if we're not fully healed, listen up, If we're not fully healed, there's a good chance we are not who we're supposed to be. Why? Because we are broken. We are not functioning correctly. Anything that is broken doesn't run right. A car that has problems with the engine doesn't run right. And when we say he's not firing on all cylinders, we are referencing to a car that is not functioning properly. That does not mean to say that they are stupid. It means that they are broken and in need of being fixed, because severe brokenness can happen to anyone. Anyone. Is that not what Yahuah did when he brought Israel out of Egypt? He had all these people, all these parts, like a jigsaw puzzle. And then he started sorting them. He goes, okay, you're in this clan, and this sojourner is with y'all, and this is your clan, and you divide here, and you get in this formation. And that's exactly what he started doing with the Israelites out of Egypt. In Exodus 12:51, we read, and it came to be on that same day that Yahuah brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their divisions. He grouped them according to their divisions. Exodus chapter 13, verse 18. So Elohim led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds. And the children of Israel went up in fives from the land of Egypt. Fives is footnoted as marching formation. So he was moving them from a slavery mentality to a warrior mentality. So if you think about it, so who was a presenter part of Israel out of Egypt? Moses, wouldn't you say? I would say it was Moses. So Yahuah not only grouped them by their 12 tribes and leaders, but he also then grouped them into 4 lead quadrants: the lion, the ox, the man, and the eagle. And he wasn't finished there. After the sin of the golden calf, he assigned Aaron as his high priest, and Aaron's sons as priests with the tribe of Levi to assist with the temple chores and duties. You see, after the sin of the golden calf, his heart was broken. It was Yahuah's heart. Yahuah's heart was broken. And that fragmentation, that huge fragmentation, was felt by all like a great earthquake, because we remember he was ready to wipe them out. But Moses, the presenter part, interceded, did he not? This called for a whole new organization or system. I hope this is connecting the dots for you guys. They no longer would be his kingdom of priests, plural, like they had become at Mount Sinai at the beginning, and were under the Melchizedek book of the covenant, their marriage covenant. But after the sin of the golden calf, now a new system had to be implemented, because there was much brokenness. And that new system was the book of the law. It would be imposed, and they would now be a nation with a priest, singular, under the newly formed Aaronic Levitical priesthood. Because remember, Yah spoke to both Moses and Aaron before the sin of the golden calf, but after the sin of the golden calf, Aaron and his sons, he didn't speak to them, not until Moses would ordain them and cleanse them, because Moses was the only acting high priest at that time who was still under the Melchizedek book of the covenant. Because remember, Moses and Joshua were up on the mount when all the sin of the golden calf was taking place. So Moses had to cleanse them and ordain them before Yahuah would speak to them again, especially speak to Aaron as the high priest. So this is huge. Remember that Aaron was a priestly leader of righteousness before there was a need before there was a need for the Aaronic Levitical priesthood to implement the strict schoolmaster of the book of the law. Very important to, I mean, what I just told you is extremely important. And there's so many people don't get it, don't get it. Matter of fact, sometimes they don't want to hear it. And why? Because they've been programmed. They've been living under lie-based beliefs. The next part is conditioned parts. These parts are often formed through conditioning, programming, or some kind of manipulation. They often have a warped sense of reality and can be illogical due to enforced beliefs. I mean, Satan is working double time to put people in fantasy land. Let them just go out and play. Let them just go out and listen to things that tickle their ears. Let them just function in the fantasy realm, the metaverse. That's a very dangerous place to be in this point in time. We need to be in his word. We need to be guided by his truth. Because we know there are people that have grown up in cult-like churches with some level of mind control was induced. Individuals may keep repeating, King James only, King James only, or this is the way it is. This is just the way it is. I'm telling you, this is the way it is. Or they might say, my pastor said, my pastor said, my pastor said. See, there is nothing wrong with preferring the King James Version or having an opinion if presented correctly, or appreciating what your pastor has taught in his function. Shouldn't really be from a position like a Nicolaitan position. Pastors should pastor according to their gift and function within the body, not to exalt themselves over the congregations. So there's nothing wrong with appreciating those that have been given the gift to pastor, to function as a pastor. However, when such phrases prevent a person from having a teachable spirit, there may be a problem. Such phrases may be looping so much in their mind, King James Version only, King James Version only, King James Version only, that they are unable to receive what you're saying or receive the scripture that is being presented to them. They can't break free from the repetitions. They have been conditioned. So there are parts of their mind that are conditioned into a certain way of thinking. And they find it very difficult to get over that. Healing these parts are addressed in the Fragmented Soul series, but for now, this is just an introduction of these kinds of different parts. There may even be cases where part of us believes something and part of us doesn't believe something. In other words, and this is significant, in other words, a person can know it's a lie or at least an exaggeration just so they can cope with it in their minds, because it's extremely difficult to unbelieve the lie-based belief that has been instilled in them. Why? Because many times the lie or the conditioning comes from someone that they always looked up to. They always loved. They always trusted. They put that person on a pedestal. If they said jump, they said how high. They've been programmed. They've been conditioned because we've accepted something as truth, yet we may know that it is not true, but we feel we must live like it is true, even though we know it's not truth. And that's where the illogicalness comes into play. That is a problem, but it is not something that cannot be fixed. The healing process can heal with lie-based beliefs and conditioning. It takes time, energy, risk, and love, and lots of patience, and it takes a willingness to be healed. For instance, in Egypt, Israel had grown accustomed to their slave environment. They compromised and found it tolerable to exist on crumbs from the Egyptian tables. That was until a Pharaoh arose that knew not Joseph. Now they found it harder to believe the lies they told themselves as the proverbial water pot came to a boil. They were forced to face their hard reality and no longer fool themselves. Now, 40 years prior, they had scoffed at Moses trying to rescue them. But now, in Yah's perfect timing, because it is your healing, your soul integration will come about in Yah's perfect timing. So with the rescue of the Israelites out of Egypt, in Yah's perfect timing, their hearts had been humbled and became ready to listen to Moses. But even still, as they came out of the bondage of Egypt, they irrationally lusted for the flesh pots of Egypt that had been readily available under their slave masters. They had stinking thinking that would take time to realign with their freedom and watch care of the one true living and loving Elohim. It was very, very different. They had just shifted to a whole different reality. Their captivity had conditioned their thinking, but not in a good way. And frankly, that's where we find ourselves now, because we are in Egypt, quote unquote, Egypt, Mystery Babylon, Egypt. We are in Mystery Babylon environment, and we are in captivity. And we have been conditioned in several ways. So the Israelites, they were messed up, yet Yah showed them mercy by allowing them to go on after whoring with the golden calf. Their fragmented soul was blatantly flaunted. Their soul was sick, and many times sick souls lead to disease and death. After the sin of the golden calf, it led to 3,000 of them dying. Corporately, they suffered from a broken mind, a broken will, and broken emotions. They were weak souls, not ready to become Yahuah's royal bride. They desired it, but their soul was broken. They had a whore's mentality, and they lusted for the sinful Egyptian gods. Their royal marriage covenant had been broken. They had a twisted connection to their abuser. Yah knew this, and Yah knew that deprogramming them would not be easy. It would require a different approach, a different system. Hence, like we've reiterated, the system required would be the schoolmaster of the imposed book of the law. That's why it is so very important for us to understand how to rightly divide his word of truth, how to differentiate what reigning priesthood is in place at the time, at whatever part of the Bible you're reading, and therefore what law in that book of the Bible are they under? We must know how to rightly divide his word of truth. It's not rocket science, but if you desire to learn, you can learn it. If you turn a deaf ear to it, you'll just choose to go in your merry way and believe what you want to believe what tickles your ears. So the Israelites had to be taught as a child because their growth had been stunted in Egypt. And we find ourselves today in this very same place. Next, we have protector parts. The protector parts' primary role is to protect. They are essentially the bouncer of our soul. Protector parts are commonly found in those that have been abused. These parts deal with abuse, therefore, most of the time, they'll be aggressive. Why? Because they are defending against attack. If you have ever gone somewhere where there are bouncers, they are not bookworms, they're not geeks. Protectors are physically strong, muscular, have a very big presence, and they're very intimidating. So these parts can even be transgendered parts. And Pastor Bob goes on to explain. For example, a female may take on the characteristics of a male to stand up to an attacker. Pastor Bob is not saying that this is the reason why people are this way, but there are certain cases where someone that has been the victim of abuse, especially a female, will create a protector part with male attributes. The part is not actually male, but it perceives itself to be male. Because if a female has a male abuser, the female may desire a strong male protector part as her defense. This fragmented part cannot think like a male. It can only act like it thinks a male would act. With females, they cannot think like a man, and men cannot think like women. It's just not possible because we are wired differently. The idea is if they are male, then they would want to be, the idea is if they are male, then they won't be attacked by their abuser if the abuser is a man. What we must understand about these parts is that they're acting with the maturity level of when they had been broken. Oftentimes when the trauma first started. So the part might be very young. They might even bite. They may kick, scream, spit. Why? Because they're very young. They don't oftentimes have the capabilities of speech because they're young. They just know fight. They just know fight. That is all they know. So this is where we must be very careful that we don't abuse people further. So if we associate protector parts to Israel, who was the protector of Israel? It was Yahuah himself. Yah protected his people from all the plagues he brought upon the Egyptians. He led them out of Egypt with a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. He was their front guard. He was their rear guard. The next part are burden bearers. These parts believe that it's their job to carry all the burdens of the host and sometimes other people's burdens too. You can have a false burden bearer which carries everyone else's burdens. So they're not just carrying their burdens, they're carrying more burdens. We are to share one another's burdens, but often one person is carrying another's burden, and then they're carrying their burden as well. Therefore, the burden bearer has not lightened the load, they have doubled it upon themselves. They are deeply wounded, and they believe that it's their job in life to carry burdens, but to convince them otherwise is very difficult. So we must be very careful with these types of parts. You know, the Bible says we are to share one another's burdens, but we cannot carry all of someone else's burdens and carry our burdens too. We can be there and share our burdens, but not to a point that it's overwhelming. Now, here's an example in the Bible of a burden bearer. Moses was a burden bearer until his father Jethro wisely corrected him, and that takes place in Exodus 18:13-19. And it came to be on the next day that Moses sat to rightly rule the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. And when the father-in-law of Moses saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit by yourself and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to seek Elohim. When they have a matter, they come to me, and I rightly rule between one and another and make known the laws of Elohim and his Torah." And the father-in-law, Moses, said to him, What you are doing is not good. Both you and these people with you shall certainly wear yourselves out, for the matter is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it by yourself. Now listen to my voice. Let me counsel you, and Elohim be with you. Stand before Elohim for the people, and you shall bring the matters to Elohim. See, we are to be yoked with Yahuah, right? Yahuah said to take on his yoke. His burdens are light. He's there to help us bear our burdens. So Jethro became a coach, a counselor to that fragmented part of Moses that felt he had to bear everyone's burdens. Moses possibly was trying to make up for the time he personally failed 40 years prior and killed the Egyptian. Moses may have held on to insecurities and felt he must overcompensate. Thankfully, between Jethro, Moses, and Yahuah, they came up with the proper solution for not only healing Moses, but strengthening Yah's people in the Torah and growing leaders to rule over thousands, over hundreds, 50s, and 10. Plus, the people didn't have to wait in long lines for answers. I believe that is what Yah wants from us today, for all of you to become strengthened and prepared for these people in the end of days. You may be over 10, you may be over 50, you may be over 100 or 1,000. I don't know. But that's the system he has developed, and that system's going to work best. And he wants us to be strengthened. The next part may be the narrator part. Narrator parts can be very helpful for us because they're detached from any emotion. They usually don't have emotion. You may say, well, how's that possible? Oftentimes, they're just pure mind. They're just pure mind. They're pure thinking. You know, remember the horse and rider was to keep our thinking and emotions in balance, but the narrator part, they're out of balance. They're all mind. They're all thinking, meaning they don't have a will. They don't have emotion. Why? Because they're able to recall and describe trauma and abuse in detail without an emotional attachment. It's like reading a statement of someone that the trauma has happened to. These parts have got no attachment to the trauma. They are just able to narrate something without really any desires one way or the other. Without any emotions, narrator parts usually occur in people that have been really, really traumatized, like sexual abuse or real violent abuse. The narrator part serves to tell what was happening, but they don't get emotionally attached to their words. Now, there's an example of this I found in the Bible with the widow at Zarephath, and I felt like she demonstrated that when she spoke to Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 12. And she said, as Yahuah your Elohim lives, I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin, and a little oil in a jar. And see, I am gathering a couple of sticks, and shall go in and prepare it for myself and my son, and we shall eat it and die. It was really emotionless. She was just stating facts. Party parts. They are called party parts because they often appear the opposite of broken. You may ask, are they broken? Absolutely. They are broken, but they're flamboyant, they're careless, they're carefree, no regret attitude, and no regard for consequences. They exhibit no work ethic, just party and having fun. So they really have no responsibilities, no cares. They're just going to go out and they're going to do something regardless. They will spend money. They will be flamboyant. They will do things without thinking. They will do things regardless of the consequences. They are just there to have fun, irrespective of what anyone else is doing, whether it hurts the host, whether it hurts other people. They oftentimes, they don't care. They're not narcissists. They're just there to party. Their attitude is like, let's go do something, like tomorrow. They are careless and carefree, but also it's not as if they can't think things through. It's just that they're often not able to see the consequences because they're focused in the moment. They are that broken. Many times these party parts have severe depression. In the moment, they can enjoy life. But when they step down, it's all depression and anxiety and stuff like that. Often these types may take their lives, so one must be very careful. The evil twin part, referred to as evil twins because they're exactly the same as us, just oftentimes very early fragments. But they want everything opposite of us. If we want God, they want everything opposed to God. If we want to go right, they want to go left. If we want to move up, they want to go down. If we want to focus on righteousness, they want to focus on sin. They want everything the opposite of whatever good we want. They want the opposite, and often their desires are for addictive sin. Therefore, a lot of people that have sins that are addictive, secret sins are associated with evil twin parts. They're very, very wounded. And oftentimes the reason is because they're mad at God for some reason. So whatever they do, they want the opposite of whatever God does. With this kind of logic, they figure that doing such hurts God. But really, what they are not seeing is that it's hurting themselves as well and those around them. Oftentimes, when people have desires that are completely contrary to what normally we would desire, we're dealing with, oftentimes when people have desires that are completely contrary to what normally we would desire, we're dealing with what Pastor Bob Strahan calls an evil twin. That is because they're exactly the same as us, but they just want everything opposite. And I think we all have somewhat of an evil twin part in us. Paul explains this evil type of twin, I believe, in the book of Romans. So I'm pretty sure we all have some degree of it as well. In Romans chapter 7, verse 19 through 25, for the good that I wish to do, I do not do, but the evil I do not wish to do, this I practice. And if I do that which I do not wish, it is no longer I who work it, but the sin dwelling in me. I find therefore this law, that when I wish to do the good, that the evil is present with me. For I delight in the Torah of Elohim according to the inward man. But I see another Torah in my members, battling against the Torah of my mind. That's the Torah of your soul, right? And bringing me into what? Captivity, to the Torah of sin, which is in my members. Wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death? Thanks to Elohim, through Yahuah HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, our master. So then, with the mind, I myself truly serve the Torah of Elohim, but the flesh, the Torah of sin. Oppressed parts. These are the parts that are often controlled by something demonic. They might not even believe that they are part of us. We must realize that Satan is out to attack people, and demons are very, very real, and they are attacking people. And in my opinion, that attack has increased in our day and time. Satan wants to attack Christians the most. Why? Because those that are not Christians, those are those that are doing the devil's work. He just lets them alone, right? Because Satan doesn't throw stones at dead birds. They're not a threat to him. Why? Because they're not hurting him. They're part of his deal. And they are the walking dead, if you will. They have not been born anew. He especially wants to attack Christians that are wanting to do something. So parts that are oppressed are often under control. You know, when we talk about pastors, that have taken their own lives, they are usually pastors that have gotten into sin. Oftentimes it's big. It is because of demonic things, demonic influence, but it's also a lot to do with brokenness. Remember, fragmented souls are weakened and are more prone to be under demonic influence. Fragmented souls can do wicked things, but remember, it is our spirit that is born again, and it is our soul in the sanctification process that should eventually show fruit worthy of repentance. It's not a get out of jail free card to go and sin and all do whatever you want to do. No, the soul in a true sanctification process should show fruit worthy of repentance, because his word says we will know them by their fruit. When someone takes their own life, it doesn't necessarily mean they were not saved. It may mean they were broken and under demonic influence and control. The last part, clone. Clone parts are just demons. Clone parts, Pastor Bob Strahan has identified this particular part as a clone part. He said they are just demons masquerading as true, genuine parts. So the goal is to identify these creepy clones. This is important because we need to determine if we are speaking to true parts or are we talking to a demon. To resolve this dilemma, we use the Jesus test or the Yahuah test. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 1 through 3, listen carefully. Beloved ones, do not believe every spirit, but prove the spirits, whether they are of Elohim, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this, you know the spirit of Elohim. Every spirit that confesses that Yahuah, Jesus the Messiah, has come in the flesh is of Elohim. And every spirit that does not confess that Yahuah, Jesus the Messiah, has come in the flesh is not of Elohim. And this is the spirit of the anti-Messiah, which you heard is coming and now is already in the world. Now, Pastor Bob poses this question. Who can say that Yahuah came in the flesh? Well, we know even people that are not saved can verbally say Yahuah is Elohim, came in the flesh. It's not hard for them, but the key is that we're talking about spirits. Can a demon say that? No, absolutely not. Because notice the scripture says every spirit that confesses or does not confess that Yahuah is come in the flesh. So that's going to differentiate if the spirit is of the Elohim or if you're dealing with a demonic spirit. We are not talking about human beings here. He's talking about spirits. Spirits that can confess this are of Elohim. So spirits that can confess, yes, Yahuah came in the flesh, they are of Elohim. And those that cannot are of the anti-Messiah. Lastly, especially at this point, you want to focus on the eyes. For those doing counseling, keep a watch on the eyes because you can tell a lot by someone's eyes. The eyes are where we watch and observe for switching. You can tell when someone switches personality. You can see the change. You can see when they switch to something demonic. You will be able to see the difference of hurt, anger, bitterness versus wrath, evil, hate. You can tell when someone is wounded and afraid versus something that just hates you with all disdain and emptiness. Sometimes a masquerading demon will make a true part, a true fragmented part, answer the YHWH test for them. That's why you need to be looking at the eyes. So be watching the eyes for switching. This happens more in deliverance. It is not advised to communicate with demons because they are just flat out liars and no progress would be made. So the Fragmented Soul series and this introductory view is meant to just bring an awareness to all of you at the different levels of brokenness and fragmentation of souls all around us every day. It is meant to encourage all of us to go through the Fragmented Soul series, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe go into some of the other series like Spiritual Warfare series. And he's also got a series on mind control series. I haven't even made it through the mind control series. And some of you may be called to become a coach so as to be able to help heal broken hearts and soul fragments in order for his people to love him with their whole hearts. Yahuah dwelt among the Israelites through a tent. Now he dwells within his people through the Spirit. Shalom, and have a blessed day, and may you each day grow from strength to strength. Shabbat Shalom.